Hello BookTube. It's the end of 2025, which means that YouTube is flooded with end of year content, reading wrap-ups, best and worst books of 2025, etc. I know a lot of people tend to do individual videos, worst books of 2025, best books of 2025, but I have to say my reading year overall has been pretty stellar, and I haven't read that much that sucked, which is a really nice change of pace for me because normally my reading tends to be quite uneven with a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And so I didn't think that I had enough to talk to you about to make a worst books of the year video. I thought what might be more fun is to do a kind of 2025 bookish awards with various categories, but I have so much that I want to talk to you about. I have read so many fantastic books this year that it was really hard to narrow down picks for each individual category. So I have collated 9 different bookish related categories, and for each category I have 4 nominees as well as an overall winner, because I just couldn't narrow it down. I had so many things I wanted to talk to you about, so many great books that I read this year. It's been a really transformative year of reading for me. I've really come into my love of genre fiction, romance, fantasy, sci-fi, and it's been a very different kind of reading year for me. I've moved into a lot of new genres, I've discovered a lot of new authors, so I thought this would be a really fun way to wrap that up and to talk about as many of the great books that I've read this year as possible. I'm anticipating that this could be a long one, so buckle in, grab a snack, grab a beverage, and let's just get into the categories. I'd like to end the video on a high, so I'm gonna start by talking about some of the more negative categories, and then we're going to move into some of the more positive moments of my reading year. So I thought we would just get worst book of the year out of the way. As I said, I really didn't have a lot of terrible reads this year, so it was actually quite hard to pick out 4 nominees for worst book, but I have managed to put together a list. If I'm looking down, it's because I have everything written down in this notebook. The nominees for worst book of 2025 are The Princess Knight by Cait Jacobs, which is a fantasy romance following a young woman whose planned arranged marriage doesn't come to pass. In order to set herself back on the right path that she thinks is going to be to the benefit of herself and her kingdom, she enrolls into a military academy to follow the man that she believes that she should marry for the benefit of the kingdom, and while there begins to fall in love with the knight who agrees to help train her, and also is part of the uncovering of a wider plot to destabilize the tentative alliance between the kingdoms. I talked about this one at length in my romantasy vlog if you've seen that one, so I'm not going to go into this one in too much detail, but ultimately this one was just entirely forgettable. It was a pretty flimsy mythical retelling. I didn't really get any strong sense of the culture or the mythology that the author drew from for this book, which was Irish mythology. The plot was kind of weak and not very well thought through. The characters were pretty one note, and ultimately this one just bored me. It's not particularly egregious in the fact that it's not offensive or particularly problematic or anything like that. It's just not a very interesting or compelling read, unfortunately. The next entry for this category may be a little bit controversial, as it is a book that I DNF'd. I only got about 40 pages into this book, but I felt that it deserved a spot on the list because of the very poor quality of writing, which was the entire reason that I couldn't continue. It was painful to read at points, and it felt that it had been completely unedited. And that is Look Up Handsome by Jack Strange. Really pained me to put this on this list. I really wanted to love this one because it is a queer romance set in Hay-on-Wye, which is a bookish town in South Wales, which is one of my favourite places in the world, and it is a romance between a bookseller and a romance novelist, and I really wanted to love this one, but the writing was just so poor, and for that I think it deserves a place on this list, even though it is a DNF, and for that reason, spoiler alert, but it won't win this category. I couldn't in good faith nominate and award a book that I didn't finish the worst book of the year award. I felt like it deserved its place on the list as a nominee. Following that, we have 2 more romance books that I don't think are necessarily terrible reads, but they just did not work for me. The first of those is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. I went into this expecting it to be humorous. Like, the title does not suggest that you're in for a very serious high fantasy novel, but the silliness was just a bit too much for me. This book follows a character called Cinnamon, who is a cinnamon farmer. Everything in this book is incredibly on the nose. I believe her brothers were called Cumin and Chili, and her best friend is called Brie. And this is set in a world where people believe demons to be incredibly dangerous and threatening creatures, and they are kept safe by this deity. And every year, a group of people from the village are selected to go out and hunt the demons down, I suppose. It is their job to go out and protect this. I think there's like a kind of breach between the worlds where demons are able to enter, and they go out to fight any demons that have come through. Our protagonist inadvertently saves a demon and then discovers that actually there may be more to this whole deity and the hatred of demons in this society, and kind of uncovers this whole conspiracy, and along the way happens to fall in love with the demon. This one had a lot of promise. It could have been a really fun, funny, romantic fantasy, but it was just, like I said, it was just too silly for me. Something else that really didn't work for me was being in this high fantasy world, but having such modern colloquial slang terms throughout the book, and the smut was quite poorly written as well. I thought it was written in a kind of a cringy way, and so ultimately this one just didn't work for me. But I can see why it is popular, and I can see why people have fun with it. It's incredibly silly. It doesn't take itself too seriously at all. So if you're looking for something that is very on the nose, very ridiculous to have a fun time, then this book will be perfect for you. It just didn't work for me. Then the final nominee for this category is Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This is another one that I really hope that I would love. It is a baking show competition, and two of the contestants meet, fall in love, etc. And I thought that I was going to really love this one, but just, I don't know what it was, but the romance was not compelling to me at all. I did not feel the chemistry between the characters. It started off quite strong, and then by the end of the book, I had just had enough. I just had enough of it. It wasn't working for me. I didn't believe in the romance between the characters. I wasn't invested in any of the wider conflicts in the book. I found the characters to be pretty dull and the romance to be uninteresting. I didn't really root for the characters to get together at all. So for that reason, it is one of my worst books of the year, but I still think this one could work for other people as well. It just didn't work for me. The winner for worst books of 2025 is The Princess Knight by Cait Jacobs. I believe I gave this one a 2-star, which was my lowest rating of the year. Like I said, this is not a particularly egregious book. I just didn't think it was well written. I thought it was pretty shaky, and I didn't have a great time with this one, but again, other people might enjoy it, especially if you're someone who enjoys YA fantasy, because this is a much more YA leaning novel. The next category is our final negative category, so that we can move on to the positives and talk about some of the books that really made my year. And this category is most disappointing books of 2025. The first one in this category I think is going to be very controversial because it is a beloved book, and that is Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stuart. This was my first time reading Douglas Stuart, and I started with Shuggie as I believe it is his debut novel, and this book received such high praise and is so well loved, and it just didn't work for me. I didn't feel much of a connection to the characters. I felt like the book was far too long and I got quite bored with it. I don't even really know what it was about this book, but just something about the writing didn't grip me. I didn't feel particularly invested in the characters. I found it to be quite disjointed in the way that it moved between the kind of perspectives and the stories of Shuggie and his mother. For that reason, I just didn't fall in love with this one like everyone else seems to have done. I'm definitely not giving up on Douglas Stuart. I have a copy of Young Mungo that I am still excited to read, but for me, Shuggie just, it didn't capture me like it has done for so many other people. So for that reason, it is on my most disappointing books of 2025. The next book is another very, very beloved book that is very topical right now, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I understand that the characters in this are supposed to be terrible, they're supposed to be unlikable. There is like nobody to root for in here. This is I hesitate to say that it's a romance. It focuses on the romantic relationship between Kathy, who is the daughter of a wealthy family, and Heathcliff, who is kind of the young orphaned outsider that her father brings home. I understand that Kathy and Heathcliff are awful, terrible people who make each other worse throughout the novel. I understand this. But I just found every character in this so irritating, because all anybody seemed to do was just whinge and whinge and whinge, and everybody was just sickly for like no reason. I find this happens a lot in classics, and I get it because they had such a flimsy understanding of medicine compared to now in the present day, when we have a lot more scientific backing for our understanding of diseases and illness. But so many people just need to waste away for no reason in classic books, and it does my nut in a little bit. Everyone is just so annoying to read. I love an unlikable protagonist. I love reading about someone who is morally complex, somebody who is very muddy and has a lot of complexity and depth to them. I didn't feel that in this book. I didn't feel that there was any depth to these characters. They were all just self-serving, whingy fucks. I just did not like reading about them at all. I could not find them compelling. I did not find the relationship between Kathy and Heathcliff to be compelling. Like, the writing just overall, save for a few very popular, very well-known quotes, didn't work for me. So I was very disappointed in Wuthering Heights. I'd hoped to love this as much as everyone else does, as a piece of gothic literature that really explores the kind of worst of humanity, I guess, in a way, or our worst tendencies. But yeah, I just found this one annoying to read and I didn't like it. The next book that I have nominated for the most disappointing book of 2025 is Anything is Possible by Elizabeth Strout. And the reason that I found this one so disappointing was because I reread My Name is Lucy Barton this year. I had felt fairly ambivalent about that book when I first read it. I don't think I was in the right mindset for it. And I read it physically and I thought it was good, just not anything particularly memorable. But then I reread it on audio. The audiobook narrator is fantastic. She really brings all of the characters to life. And I just found it to be so much more moving and impactful on a reread. So I was very excited to carry on with the rest of the series. Honestly, none of the books have really lived up to the first one, but in particular, Anything is Possible really disappointed me. In particular, for the just rampant fat phobia in the writing. I understand that fat phobia is very prevalent throughout society, and it is something that people engage in without even really noticing that they are doing it. But I felt like it was not critiqued in this book. I understand that it makes sense to have people engage in forms of bigotry and prejudice towards other people, but you have to explore it, you have to be aware of it, and you have to kind of be making a commentary on it. Otherwise it feels like you are just being fatphobic. Do you know what I mean? I really wanted to love this one. Some of the stories in this book, it's a kind of continuation of the stories of Lucy Barton, and it's the one book in the series that is not presented as being written by Lucy Barton. It is a sort of collection of interconnected short stories that focus on people surrounding Lucy and people who live in her hometown of Amgash. In particular, the story about her brother Pete Barton was incredibly moving, and so I really wanted to love this one, but I could not get past all of the, particularly the female characters, just constantly talking about how other female characters were fat and ugly, and because of it they were terrible, and it just took away from my enjoyment of the book so much. So this one had to get a place on this list for that reason. The final entry into most disappointing books of 2025 is a historical queer fiction called Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, and this book focuses on two male soldiers throughout the American Civil War who are secretly together. They fall in love at quite a young age. I believe they meet when they're teenagers. They fall in love. They enlist together in the Civil War, and it's about their relationship as history kind of unfolds around them. And they happen to meet a young Native American girl who they form a kind of parental attachment to, and it is about their quest as a group to kind of forge a more positive path forward into the future and build some kind of family together. The problem with this book was it's written kind of from the perspective of one of the men in older age, and he's recounting to you his kind of life story with these two people. And because of that framing device, the novel just felt like it was telling me what was going on and how everyone was impacted in the story rather than showing me the impacts. And it made me feel very distant from the story. I couldn't really connect to anything because it just felt like I was being told this happened and I felt this way about it, and then this happened and some other things happened. And nothing about the writing made me feel emotionally invested in what was going on. And equally, given the history of the founding of the United States and given the treatment of Native American peoples throughout US history, I didn't really feel like the author did a good job in reckoning with that, and the characters didn't really seem to do a lot of reflection on their role as white male soldiers in the violence that was taking place and being perpetrated against Native American people. I felt like the author could have done more to explore the complexities of these two men, these two soldiers, growing to love and kind of adopt this young Native American girl when they are taking part in perpetrating violence against her people. And it didn't really deal with that complexity at all. For both of those reasons, I wasn't really a fan of Days Without End. Having said that, my most disappointing book of 2025 had to be Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stuart. Unfortunately, I think this one disappointed me the most because I had the highest expectations of it, because it is so well loved and it is so highly reviewed. I don't think I spoke to you about what it's about because I kind of just expect everybody to know. Shuggie, Bain focuses on a young boy called Shuggie growing up in 1980s Glasgow. He is a queer boy, but the story focuses more so on his relationship to his mother, who he loves very dearly and she loves him very dearly, but she is suffering with alcoholism, and it is about the toll that that takes on her life, on Shuggie's life. And so this one should have made me feel so much, and I just didn't. The writing just fell completely flat for me, and I didn't feel much when I was reading it. I just felt very ambivalent about the story, which is why this one was so disappointing to me, because I thought I was going to fall head over heels with this book like everyone else has, and it just left me feeling very flat. Now that we've gotten those two categories out of the way, let's focus on some more positives. So the flip side of most disappointing book, we now have most surprising book of 2025, which are books that surprised me in a positive way. Books I maybe had heard mixed things about, or I didn't have very concrete expectations of going into them, and they surprised me in some way. First book on this list is The Gathering by C.J. Tudor. I got this from the library on a whim. I just got it on BorrowBox. It seemed like a fun wintry thriller. And when I tell you, I read pretty diversely when it comes to genre, but I do not read thrillers much whatsoever. I'm not really big into crime, mystery, thriller books at all. So I had no expectations going into The Gathering whatsoever. The reason I picked it up and the reason that I was intrigued by it is because this is set in a world where vampires exist and humanity is aware of the existence of vampires, but they are very much a maligned group of people, and they are kind of forced to live in these colonies or communities outside of or removed from humanity, and they are very much treated like second-class citizens. When a murder is committed in a very isolated Alaskan town, a detective is sent up to investigate as the townspeople are calling for what is essentially a cull of the nearby vampiric community. If vampires are found to be committing crimes against humans, the police have the power in this world to call for a cull where basically the townspeople can go and murder all of these vampires for their own safety. Our detective, who is a lesbian, which I didn't know going into the book, but I was very pleased to be able to read about an older lesbian character, and I thought that was quite a nice choice because we get to explore the detective's backstory a little bit in the book, and the backstory is very interesting and compelling, and it relates to both her developing sexuality but also her history with vampiric people as well. So that was a really interesting and fun aspect of the book that I enjoyed a lot. I hope I'm still in roughly the same place. I just have to jump up for a second. But this detective has to go and investigate, and the townspeople are increasingly restless. They are increasingly agitated and angry. And it was a really interesting concept for a thriller, but it was also quite a nice metaphor for various forms of bigotry, and it allowed the author to explore those themes of otherness in this kind of police procedural kind of thriller. I think I gave this one a 4-star. I really enjoyed it, and I would be keen to read more from CJ Tudor. So that one was really surprising for me as someone who doesn't really enjoy the thriller genre whatsoever, but is every now and again compelled to pick one up just to see, just to dip a toe. The next book that really surprised me in 2025 was The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. This has obviously been talked about a lot, and I think it's quite a contentious book. I've seen very, very mixed feeling about it online. I picked it up on a whim for a local book club. I could get this from the library, so I thought, why not? I have since picked up a copy. I found this in Oxfam for quite cheap, so I was pretty pleased with that because I would love to go back and reread this at some point and annotate it. I didn't have high expectations for this. I was the only person in the book club that really loved this. But this one, we are in a near future where time travel has been discovered, and there is a government department called the Ministry of Time that has decided to pull people from the past into the future who were on the brink of death. So it's not going to mess up anything in their own timelines because they were about to die. They're just being brought forward into the future instead. So it doesn't change anything within their own times, but it allows them to come forward into the future. And we follow the daughter of immigrant parents who is a civil servant. She goes for this job at the Ministry of Time, and she becomes a kind of companion for one of these time refugees. One of the people who is brought back through time was a real historical figure. His name was Gengoroh, and he was a naval commander in a doomed expedition to the Arctic, and he is brought forward in time. And I was really surprised by this one. I thought it did a great job of exploring immigration and refugee status, both in this kind of time context and looking at the cultural differences between time periods, but also given the main character's status as the daughter of Southeast Asian immigrants. Sorry, the cat is walking around between my piles of books and I'm trying to make sure she doesn't knock anything over. And I thought it did a really good job of exploring the complexities of having that kind of identity, and how the character seems to be very keen to distance herself from that aspect of her past and to assimilate into a more Western society. And it kind of talks about how she is maybe willing to forego some of her own morals to make that happen. And this was fascinating, and it also had a climate change element to it as well that I really adored. So yeah, ultimately the Ministry of Time really worked for me, and I didn't necessarily think it would because I'd heard so many mixed things online about it. The next book that really surprised me in 2025 was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. I picked this one up again from the library on a whim because I was hearing so many good things about it, but I didn't expect much because it is a straight romance, and that isn't always what I really go for, and I never really find myself drawn to picking those up in particular. But this one I was hearing such good things about, and it was a kind of Sleepless in Seattle retelling, I suppose. I just found this really compelling. I loved the two main characters. I loved the found family aspect in this. The main character, Lucy, is a young single mother, and her daughter is very concerned about her mum, feels like she must be really lonely because she hasn't dated since she split from her partner who she'd had the daughter with. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he has since gone on to marry another man and they live next door, and they have this really wonderful like found family dynamic, this kind of unconventional parenting going on that I really loved. The male protagonist is a radio host who hosts a show about helping people find love, and he's become very jaded with this and is feeling very disillusioned within his job. And then he gets a call on his late night show from Lucy's daughter, who is trying to help her mum find love, and it's just incredibly tender, incredibly sweet. I really enjoyed both of the main characters in this, and I'm really keen to pick up the next book in this series when it comes out next year. I was really surprised by how much this one captured me. And the final entry for this category is You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince by Timothy Janovsky, which is one I've read very recently for my Christmas romance reading vlog, so I won't talk about this one too much at length. But the reason this one surprised me was because I've read from Timothy Janovsky before, and I have not had a good time with his romance writing. And this is also a Christmas romance, and as someone who is not very Christmassy, I was not expecting much from this at all. And I only gave it a 3.5 stars, so it wasn't like it blew me away, but I just had a much better time with it than I expected to. It's kind of a Christmassy romance between a young student who is struggling financially and a nepo baby who is the son of, please be careful, the son of two very high achieving parents who live in New York, and they have a lot of money. And I didn't really think that was going to be a setup that I enjoyed, but I had a good time. I had a good time with it, and so for that reason it got a spot on my most surprising books of 2025 list. But ultimately for this category, the winner had to be The Ministry of Time. I adored this. I gave it a 5-star, and this was part of the reason I really started to move into reading more sci-fi towards the end of this year. So I have to give The Ministry of Time a lot of credit for opening up that genre to me in a way that I didn't expect. The next category we have to talk about is Best Series. I have really enjoyed reading more series in 2025. Not every entry into this list is a series that I read start to finish, but it's one I either read the entirety of or I finished in 2025 or caught up with in 2025. The first series that we have to talk about is the My Brother's Husband duology, which is these 2 manga volumes, which I don't really see a lot of people talk about, but I think deserve more love. They are incredibly tender and thoughtful and very, very lovely. We are essentially following a young Japanese single father who is estranged from his younger brother. He has moved abroad and they haven't spoken in quite a long time. And then his brother's husband comes to stay after it turns out his brother has recently passed away, and his Canadian husband has come to Japan to meet his late husband's family and to see where he grew up and learn more about his culture. And it is about this brother having to kind of take in his brother's husband, learn more about him, and kind of confront his own internalized homophobia and how that may have impacted his relationship with his brother, and deal with the kind of homophobia within Japanese society more widely. And it is just lovely. It is just so lovely. I cried reading these books. I think they're wonderful. I would highly recommend that you pick up this series. I think this deserves a lot more love than I've seen it get. The next series that I loved this year is probably not going to come as a surprise to you if you've seen any of my previous reading vlogs, but that is the Clocktaur War duology by T. Kingfisher. I love this duology. I have really come to love T. Kingfisher this year. I've read quite a lot of her books, and I in particular have loved the books that are set in the world of the White Rat. I chose this series over The Saint of Steel because while I've enjoyed both, for me the Clocktaur War duology just had that bit extra depth, and the pacing of it was perfect, and the balance of the romantic element and the mystery element was really fantastic. This series follows a group of criminals who have been contracted by the ruler of their kind of region to assist in taking down these enormous clockwork creatures that have somehow been created by the neighbouring region that they are at war with, and they are just destroying everything in their path, and they are losing the war big time. Various military groups have tried and failed to figure out what these creatures are, where they're coming from, and if they can be taken down. So desperate times call for desperate measures, and the ruler has now contracted these criminals to band together and try and take on the Clockwork Boys themselves. So it's very, very high stakes, but at the same time it's also very funny. The balance between the humour and the darker elements of the story is just perfect. I loved all of the characters that we meet in this series, and I just loved it. I had no faults, no notes, both 5 stars. Loved it to bits. The next series I have to talk about is one that I read the entirety of this year, and that is the Doomsday books by KJ Charles. So that starts with The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen and finishes with The Nobleman's Guide to Seducing a Scoundrel. This is a historical romance set in the Kentish marshes, is it? Kind of follows a family of smugglers who get involved with the kind of nobility in the area through these kind of illicit for the time relationships. I did not love The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen. I thought it was fine, but it wasn't my favourite KJ Charles. But I absolutely adored The Gentleman's Guide to Seducing a Scoundrel. I loved the main character at the centre of this from that family of smugglers that I mentioned. I had to give this series a spot on this list because of my love for this one. It was just, I adored it. So much fun. The final entry on this list for best series is the Mid Century New York City books by Cat Sebastian. We Could Be So Good, which I read last year, and You Should Be So Lucky, which I read this year. And this is another historical series following journalists in 1960s New York. I have such a soft spot for this series. I loved both of these books to pieces. I think they are some of the best historical romance I've ever read, and I just adore Cat Sebastian. These books in particular are just incredibly special, and I think should be more widely read. Having said that, I couldn't give this award to any other series than the Clocktaur or Duology. I adored this series with my whole heart this year, and I cannot wait to pick up Daggerbound, which is going to be T. Kingfisher's later release in 2026. He's releasing 2 books, a horror and Daggerbound, which is a fantasy, and it's going to carry on the story of one of the characters from this duology, and I'm so excited. I loved this series to bits. Next we have Best Sequel, and again 4 nominees, starting with Subtle Blood by KJ Charles, which is the final installment in the Will Darling series. This series is another historical series following the same couple throughout 3 books, and it is a kind of will they won't they be able to get it together, set on the backdrop of various mysterious crimes happening throughout post-war London, post-World War One London. And I loved the setting of this. I really felt like I was in 1920s London. I loved the side characters. Again, I'm not one for mystery and crime, but I loved the mysteries at the centre of this. Like, KJ Charles is a fantastic mystery writer, I think, as well as a fantastic romance writer. And I just adored this series. But I only read 1 entry in 2025, which is why I didn't put it into my best series category. The next entry into this category is My Brother's Husband Volume 2. Obviously, I just spoke about this, so I won't go into it in too much more detail. But this is just fantastic. It's a wonderful exploration of family dynamics, of learning about other peoples, about connection, bringing down people's walls and bigotries, and I just think that it is fantastic. Then once again we have Cat Sebastian with You Should Be So Lucky. I think that Mark Bailey, who is one of the characters at the centre of this book, is probably my favourite protagonist from the whole of this year. I love Mark with my whole heart. I think he is fantastic. This one follows Mark Bailey, who has been in a very serious relationship with his partner, who unfortunately dies before the events of this book, and he is grieving for that relationship. But given that they are 2 gay men in 1960s New York, they were closeted. Mark is kind of out and open with his friends, but his late partner, I believe, was a lawyer, and so had to be very discreet. And so it's very difficult for Mark to be able to grieve this relationship because they weren't together publicly. And he is struggling very hard at the beginning of this novel. And he is assigned by Andy, who is one of the protagonists of We Could Be So Good, to cover the kind of season of this baseball player, Eddie O'Leary. Yeah, Eddie O'Leary, who is kind of become public enemy number one in the world of baseball after reacting very badly to the news of his transfer. He's been transferred to a team in New York, and he responded to that very badly in the public eye. And so Mark is kind of sent to do a spotlight on Eddie's season, and they get to know one another throughout the course of writing these columns. And it was just such a wonderful romance. I would reread this tomorrow. I could probably reread this once a month for the rest of my life. I just love this book so much. The final entry into this category is Chef's Choice by TJ Alexander. This one in particular deserves its spot on this list because I did not particularly enjoy the first entry in this series, which is Chef's Kiss. I found that to be kind of a middle of the road book. I didn't love it. The premise of this book is it's another fake dating to get your inheritance situation. I don't know what it is with romance novelists. They love this trope, and you know what? Fair play, it is a lot of fun. I found this couple to be a lot more compelling than the couple in the first installment in the series, and I enjoyed this a hell of a lot more. I was really invested in the relationship. I was invested in the core tropes at the centre of the book. I really enjoyed this one. If anybody has read Chef's Kiss and wasn't enamoured with that book, then I would still recommend that you pick up Chef's Choice because I think that is a marked improvement over the first book in the series. But having said all of that, it could only go to You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. I love this book. I love this book so much. It's one of my favourite things I've read all year, and I just think that Cat Sebastian is one of the best writers of historical romance that is working right now. I think she's fantastic. The characters in this just have so much depth. You really fall in love with both of them so dearly as individuals, but also together as a couple. And yeah, I think everybody should read this. If you're into historical romance, you should definitely be reading Cat Sebastian. I don't know what you're doing if you're not reading Cat Sebastian, to be honest. Okay. Next category is New Favourite Author. And I wanted to include this because I have a terrible habit of loving a book by an author and then never picking up anything by them ever again. And this year I've really started to turn the tide on that. And so I wanted to celebrate that by talking about some new authors that I have read for the first time and loved this year. The first author is T. Kingfisher. I'm yet to read any of her horror, but her fantasy has been blowing me away. Anything that she's written that's set in the world of the White Rat I have loved, and I can't wait to read more of her books in 2026. The next author on this list is KJ Charles, who isn't technically new to me, but I didn't start reading her until very late in 2024, and I've only developed my love for her books further in 2025, so I wanted to give her a spot on this list as well. The next nominee is BK Borison. While I didn't love Good Spirits as much as First Time Caller, I have had a great time with both of her romances, and I will be carrying on with both of those series, and I would love to get to Love Light Farms as well in future. And then finally we have N.K. Jemisin. Now N.K. Jemisin, I am still yet to read The Obelisk Gate or The Stone Sky, but I read the 5th season for the first time this year, and that book is just probably the benchmark for top tier fantasy books. That book is incredible. It's so unique. It is so layered. I was so compelled that I read that book in like 2 days, and I'm so excited to pick up more books from her, both to finish the Broken Earth trilogy, but also to read some of her other books. I couldn't in good conscience make this list without including N.K. Jemisin because I'm very keen to read more from her in the future. But the winner for this category had to be T. Kingfisher. This has been the year of T. Kingfisher for me. I have loved reading her, and I'm so excited to get to her horror in 2026 and to read more of her fantasy as well. She's so prolific. She writes like 3 books a year, I feel like. I don't know how she does it and how they're all so good. But I'm really keen to read more from T. Kingfisher, and I just absolutely loved falling into her fantasy worlds this year. So thank you, T. Kingfisher, for a great reading year. I appreciate you. The next category is Tearjerker of the Year. I am a big crier. I've always been a big crier. I cry at TV shows, I cry at films, I cry at songs, and I cry a lot at books. I wanted to give a category to all of the books that have made me sob like a little baby in 2025. The first book I have to talk about for this list is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland, which is a very, very small little novel set in 1980s rural South Wales, and it follows these two men who embark on a relationship together in secret, as they cannot be comfortably out in their small town. This is set in the 80s at the height of Thatcherism in the UK, and also against the backdrop of the AIDS crisis, and so homophobia is rampant and everywhere, and these two men have to embark on this relationship in secret. And it is just devastating. It is so well written, it is beautiful, but it will break your heart into tiny little pieces. So just bear that in mind if you go into this one, but I would highly, highly recommend it for anybody who is a lover of queer historical fiction. The next book on this list is a reread, and that is The Death of Vivek Oji by Kweke Emezi. I wept when I read this one for the first time, and I wept when I read it for the second time. This is a book set in Nigeria, and we follow the immediate family and friends of a young person called Vivek Oji, who is very unlike other people. He is struggling to relate to his family. He's a young queer person who goes through the process of kind of discovering a trans identity, I suppose. It's never really explicitly said how Vivek identifies in the book, and people kind of intermittently refer to him as he and she. There definitely seems to be some kind of gender fluidity happening there, and it is about the lives of the people that Vivek knew, the lives that he touched, but it is also about his untimely death and how that has impacted all of the people around him. And the way that this novel unfolds is just absolutely heartbreaking, and the end gets me every single time. So I would highly recommend this. Obviously, Kweke Emezi is a very popular and beloved author for good reason. Their books are just incredible in every genre, honestly. Like, it feels like there is nothing that this author cannot do. The next book I have to talk about for this category is Bellies by Nicola Danan. This book follows two young gay students who kind of fall in love at university and embark on this relationship together, and then one of them, Ming, comes out as trans, and it is about how that transition impacts on their relationship and how they move forward together throughout this transition. And this book did not go in the direction that I expected it to at all, but I'm very glad that it did everything that it did, to be honest. I thought it was very raw, very realistic, and all of the characters were very complicated. You really did root for them all, but there were moments where you really struggled to do that at times because they were all so complex and so layered. The reason this makes this list for Tearjerker of the Year is there is a moment towards the end of the book where something very tragic happens to a character that I loved very dearly and I thought was a wonderful character. And when this happened, I was just bawling my eyes out, and I continued to bawl my eyes out for the remainder of the book. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was reading this book and I was silently sobbing in bed next to my sleeping husband, but I had to finish. I had to keep going to see what happened, and I was just heartbroken. I was completely devastated by this book. I was in tears. I was blubbering like in bed, and I just could not stop myself. And the end of this book is just so beautiful and tragic and heartbreaking and so well written, and I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. This book did things to me. This book tore up my heart, and it stomped on it a bunch and then handed it back to me on a plate. Hello. The final book that I wanted to nominate for Tearjerker of the Year has already appeared in multiple categories in this awards video, and that is The Wonder Engine by T. Kingfisher, the final book in the Clocktaur Duology. I cried at the end of this book. Something happens at the end of this book that I didn't think would affect me as much as it did, but it really did, and I did have a little cry at the end of The Wonder Engine. And so yeah, I thought it deserved a spot on the list of tearjerkers of the year. But ultimately, it all came down to these two books who both broke me at the end. But ultimately it was Bellies by Nicola Danan that edged it out a little bit, because I thought at the end of this book that I might never stop crying ever again. I was broken. I was a husk of a human being at the end of this book. And so if you love to cry, then read Bellies by Nicola Danan, because it'll get you. It'll get you. The moment you've probably all been waiting for, the final two categories. We have Best Non-Fiction and Best Fiction of 2025. I'm going to start with non-fiction. I read a bunch of great non-fiction books this year that really opened my eyes to so many different things. The first nomination in this list is Cast: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, which I think just has to be the most affecting and moving book about racism that I have ever read. The way that Isabel Wilkerson explores race relations through the lens of class in this book is just so affecting and so insightful. And as you can see, I tabbed the fuck out of this book. Like, this book had me in a chokehold from the moment I picked it up. Honestly, the writing in this is so moving and so shocking. Some of the things she talks about are horrifying in this book, so this is definitely a heavy one. But sometimes I find that non-fiction, when it's dealing with very complicated aspects of society and talking about so much data, it can get a little bit dry. Cast never suffered from that. The writing in this is amazing. The writing is so fantastic, as well as the arguments that Wilkerson is putting forward being so compelling and making you think so deeply about things that I had never even considered or had never known before. This really opened my eyes to the way that racism has pervaded throughout history and the ways in which it is still affecting people today. And I just think everybody should read this book, to be honest. I think everybody should read this. I think it should be required reading. And I will definitely reread this again in future. I honestly can't recommend this enough to you. I think you definitely need to read Cast if you haven't already. I think this is a book that everybody could get something out of, and I think Isabel Wilkerson has done an amazing thing with this book, and I'm very keen to read The Warmth of Other Suns, which is her other non-fiction. Then I have Humankind by Rutger Bregman, which I believe is translated from Dutch, but I don't have a physical copy, so I'm not sure who the translator is, but I'll make sure to leave it in the box down below. This book is all about dispelling this really prominent myth that humanity is inherently selfish and we're all out for ourselves and we are all so prone to evil and doing evil deeds. And this myth is everywhere, and I definitely, as someone who studied psychology in school, definitely held this belief for a very long time, this very dark and grim view of humanity as a species. Rutger Bregman really analyzes that and really picks that apart and talks about things like things that I was studying as a psychology student, you know, the Stanford prison experiment, the Milgram shock experiments, talks about war and how all of these awful things can happen on such a large scale, but he really does make you question that in a very effective way. And I think this was a book I really needed to read this year, when obviously we have seen so many awful things happening on our screens. We have been watching a genocide happen in real time. The far right is gaining ground across the Western world. It's been a really difficult time to see the good in people, I think. And I think a lot of people have begun to feel a lot of hopelessness in the face of so many awful things happening all over the world. You know, everything that's happening in Sudan and in Gaza and in the Congo, and the fact that we can't seem to get it together to save our dying planet that we are rapidly destroying. And I really needed this. I really needed this alternate view of the goodness of humanity. So I would really recommend it if you have ever found yourself in a similar headspace to that. And additionally, this book is so accessibly written, and so engaging, and I think this is one that could appeal to a lot of people. The next entry into this list is a very beloved memoir, and that is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I wasn't sure that I was going to enjoy this one. I've heard in the past that it's very intellectual and kind of conceptual, and that people either love it or they really don't get it. But this is a memoir that recounts Carmen Maria Machado's experience of being a queer woman in a sapphic relationship that is abusive, and her experience of being a domestic abuse survivor in a type of relationship that kind of goes under the radar when it comes to the topic of domestic abuse. A lot of people think that it just doesn't happen in lesbian relationships, which is not the case whatsoever. This is one I read digitally, and I would love to get my hands on a copy so that I can reread it and annotate it, because the way that Carmen Maria Machado explored this topic was incredibly beautiful and incredibly inventive, and I understand why it is as popular as it is, because I've never really read a memoir like this. What Carmen Maria Machado achieved with this book is something very special, and I would love to reread this in the future, and I think it is definitely one of the best non-fiction books I read all year, and I would highly recommend this to you if you haven't picked this up before. If you are someone who can cope with reading about that kind of subject matter, then I think you really should. I think you really should pick this one up. I think it's a very important read. The final entry for best non-fiction of the year is Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is a deep dive into the history of the Sackler family, who are the family who owned, I can't remember the name of it now, Purdue Pharma, who are the family who owned Purdue Pharma, the medical company that created OxyContin and essentially led to an epidemic of opioid addiction in the United States. And this book is so shocking and so revealing about the system that basically allowed this to happen, the corruption that allowed this to happen, and the impacts of this corporate greed on everyday people and the millions of lives that this has impacted. I think Patrick Radden Keefe is just such an excellent journalist and an excellent writer, and it really came through in this book how meticulously researched this was, but also how compelling the writing was. And I'm very keen to pick up more from Patrick Radden Keefe. I believe he has a book coming out in 2026, but I am more interested at this current moment in picking up Say Nothing, which is a book that talks about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which I know pitifully little about, and I really ought to rectify that in the future. So thank you to Patrick Radden Keefe for writing an incredible non-fiction. The winner for this category is Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. I think that I knew that as soon as I finished this book, that no other non-fiction that I read this year was going to touch this one. This is one of the best non-fiction books I've ever read in my whole life, and I cannot recommend it to you enough. I think if you haven't read Cast, I think you really need to rectify that. I think you need to go out and read it. And finally, we have come to Best Fiction Book of 2025. Narrowing down the nominees for this one was so difficult. I have read so many fantastic books this year, and I'm so grateful to all of the authors who made that happen for me. But 4 standouts from this year are, unsurprisingly, The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This focuses on a world set in a distant future, it's Earth in a distant future, where climate change has introduced something that is called the Fifth Season, which is where every few hundred years or so a cataclysmic climate event happens that wipes out large swathes of humanity, changes the landscape, messes with the way of life as people know it. And this world has also developed these types of people who can use magic to kind of manipulate the earth, and these people are revered and feared in equal measure throughout this world. And it is set at the beginning of a 5th season beginning, and our main character Essen discovers that her husband has killed their son and kidnapped their daughter, and so she is on a mission to hunt him down and kill him and get her daughter back. And it is fantastic. I read this in 2 days because I just couldn't put it down, and it's like nearly 500 pages long, but I couldn't stop. I could not stop reading this. It is so well written. It is so fantastically paced, and I just loved everything about it. The next book that I have to talk about is The Mars House by Natasha Pulley. This is such a fun and wild concept. I got to hear Natasha Pulley talking about this back when it was released last year, I want to say, and you could tell from the way she talked about it that she just got so much joy out of writing this story, and it really comes across in the way that she spoke about it, but also in the writing itself. This is another climate change focused novel where we follow January Sterling, I want to say his name was, who is a dancer for the Royal Ballet in London, and he becomes a climate refugee when London just floods beyond recognition. And there is a colony on Mars that has been set up and is welcoming refugees from Earth. But this colony has been around for quite a long time now, and the people who are born on Mars are significantly more delicate and weaker than people who have come from Earth, the Earth-strong people. So people that are refugees from Earth are treated like second-class citizens. They're forced to wear these kind of physical cages that reduce their strength because they are so much stronger than sort of natural-born Earth, natural-born Mars people, that they can kill them accidentally so easily, and it's incredibly dangerous for them to be around people who were born on Mars. There is a politician who is kind of pursuing a very reactionary, very bigoted pathway in his politics, in their politics, sorry. I forgot to say, everybody on Mars is also non-binary. Like, they've kind of done away with the gender binary altogether, and so that's a really interesting aspect of the world. And this politician, they are pursuing a politics that is very discriminatory towards Earth-strong people. And after a televised interview kind of goes awry in January, ends up losing his job, this politician reaches out to ask him to embark on a kind of fake marriage of convenience with them in order to improve their public image and in order to kind of make amends for January losing his job. And it sounds like such a wacky concept, and it is, but it is so much fun, and it explores these themes of otherness and climate disaster and political differences and political divides, and it is just so great. It's so fantastic. The world is so much fun to read. Like, it is pretty out there, and you kind of have to suspend your disbelief about some things. Obviously, Natasha Pulley is not a scientist, but you could tell she had so much fun researching this and coming up with these different kinds of aspects to this world on Mars. And it's so much fun. And it's quite romantic as well. The romance between January and I can't remember the name of the politician. I'm sorry, it's been a while. I think I read this in like March. But the relationship is actually very tender and very sweet, and it unfolds in a way that is very believable, considering you have these two people who are very politically opposed to one another. And yeah, I would really recommend this one. It's not one that everyone is going to love because it is so out there, but I had a fantastic time. I thought it was great. The next book that I have to talk about is a recent read, and that is The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow, which is a time travel-y fantasy romance between a knight who has become this legendary folkloric figure and this historian from the modern day who is obsessed with her story and ends up being sent back in time, and their stories become very intertwined, their fates become completely intertwined. It is about the love between those two characters, and it is about their journey to try and find a way to be together, and it is just so romantic. It's so well written. It is so beautiful. I talked about this one at length again in my romantasy video, so I won't go into it too much, but I adored this. I thought it was fantastic. The writing was just so sumptuous and so gorgeous, and the romance was so compelling, and the individual characters as well were so interesting and complex on their own merits, and when they came together they were just something really special. So I loved The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. The final nominee for Best Fiction Book of 2025 is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland. This is very sparse in its writing style, but in a way that feels almost like you're reading like long form poetry. This book was beautiful to read. The relationship is so complex, and the time period is so fraught for these characters. I really appreciated everything that Anthony Shapland did in this. And again, I heard him speak. I went to a talk that he did about this book. He was asked why he felt compelled to sort of tell this story, and he said that given everything that is happening right now with the rollback of rights across the West for trans people, he said it is so reminiscent of things that have already happened in our recent past, in our recent historical memory. And so he thought it was really important to shine a light on this to show how far we've come, but how easily it will all be stripped away from us if we allow our trans siblings to be vilified as they are being in our media right now, and to remind us of everything that we've had to overcome as queer people to get to where we are and how easily it can be taken away. I think this is an incredibly timely book. Even though it is a historical fiction, it is a great reminder of the fact that anything that can be done to one aspect of the queer community can be done to another facet of the queer community, and that if we don't stand together in solidarity with one another, then apart we risk losing it all. Essentially, this is only very short, and like I said, the writing is quite sparse. It's not like super flowery or anything, so I think it's really accessible to read, and I want more people to read it. I think this one's fantastic, and I would love to reread this in the future. I've already tabbed up a little bit, but there are so many scenes in this book that I still think about, and the imagery, the significance of the title A Room Above a Shop is that the characters live in this tiny flat above a shop that one of them owns and runs and the other one works in, and this tiny room above the shop is the one place where they can really be together. And there's just so much beautiful imagery and symbolism in this book, considering it is so small. And I think there's a lot to unpack in this. For such a tiny novel, there's really a lot to sink your teeth into and to unpack. So I would highly recommend. But my winner for Best Book of 2025, I'm not going to pick. I can't choose between these two, and you will not make me. I have been thinking about this and deliberating on this and questioning myself on this for weeks. Ever since I read The Everlasting, I was like, okay, the 5th season was my book of the year, and then I read The Everlasting and I was like, what to do from here? I cannot choose between these two books. I think if you put a gun to my head and told me to pick the 5th season or The Everlasting, I would choose death. I cannot pick between these two. I adored them so much. These books are both so dear to me and so special to me, and I cannot pick, and you will not make me. You're just going to have to accept that I can't choose between the 5th season and The Everlasting, and even if I did choose, it would probably change every single day. Every half hour I'd probably change my mind on which one was my favourite. I just cannot pick, and you can't make me. You can't make me do it, and I won't do it. 2 favourite fiction books for 2025. I will not be compelled to choose between the 5th season and The Everlasting. You can't make it happen. So there you have it. That is a wrap up of all sorts of different types of reading I did in 2025. The highlights and the lowlights. I have to say, this has been a year of absolute standout reads. I've had such a great time. I've really loved my reading year. I feel like I've had such a successful year of reading. I have discovered so many new authors. I have discovered a newfound love and appreciation for different genres. And I'm really excited to see what 2026 brings in terms of my reading life. And I really hope this energy carries on into next year, because I'm just having a really great time. And I hope you are too. Let me know what reads you've loved in 2025. If there's anything that you think I should check out, that you've really enjoyed in this past year. If you've read and loved any of the books that I mentioned in this video, please talk to me about them in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Leave this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you again in my next video. But until then, stay safe and happy reading.